Okay, so maybe Oliver, just a quick introduction to you again, so that we have this also on the recording, and then you can present beer distribution game.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So yes, my name is Olver Grasl from Transcensis Consulting. We're a small consultancy based in Berlin. We've been around for a long time, 25 years, so an established company. Our topic is business transformation. We help companies re-engineer their business models, their organization, and their IT landscapes. And we've been, and so one of the topics we deal with increasingly frequently is agile transformations, and so that's why there's also the connection to Robert and to the LESS framework. And for many, many years now, we've been dealing with systems thinking, so it's a big topic in our company. I first read the book Robert mentioned beforehand, The Fifth Discipline, I think at the end of the 90s, right at the beginning of my career. And then already I was fascinated by a description of a game in that book called the beer distribution game. I'll get into the game in more detail in a second. And ever since then, I've been fascinated by systems thinking, and Peter Sengli's book really got me into this topic. And it's been a really, really fruitful thing actually for my life, because a lot of our consulting work deals with these topics. And so today, what I'd like to do, I'll first introduce the game to you. This won't take very long, and then we want to play the game live to give you the feeling of the game. The game is best played in groups, so this is actually the ideal setting. I've played it many, many times in group settings. This is the first time we're doing it in a meetup, so I'm quite excited to see how that will work out. But you can also play the game on your own. For those of you who don't want to join today, then you can play the game on your own on our website. It's freely available to everyone. Okay, so let's get started. The beer distribution game. So the beer distribution game was developed as a board game in the 1960s at MIT by Professor Jay Forrester. And the original aim of the game was to illustrate how difficult it is to manage dynamic systems. And as an example, he used the example of supply chains. And in this case, the supply chain goes from the brewery. So you have the end consumer, and the end consumer wants to purchase beer from the retailer. I'll start the other way around. And the retailer then sells the consumer beer. So essentially the consumer goes to a shop, buys some beer. But if the retailer doesn't have enough beer on stock, then he has to order the beer from the wholesaler. And then the wholesaler, again, if the beer tries to deliver beer to the retailer, and if there isn't enough beer, if the wholesaler doesn't have enough beer in stock, then he has to go to the distributor and ask the distributor, and then he goes to the brewery, and the brewery actually brews the beer, and then the beer is delivered all the way down the supply chain. And the great thing about the beer game is it's very easy to understand, as you see in a second, but actually it produces some very interesting effects. And it became popular at the end of the 90s after Peter Sengli wrote his discussed it in length in his worldwide bestseller, The Fifth Discipline. He has a really, really good description of the game in that. So I recommend anyone who hasn't got the book to get the book just for that reason. It's a fantastic book anyway. And it's sort of, that's as I say, what got me sort of interested in the game in the first place. The fun thing for me is also that many of the ideas of the beer game and obviously also about supply chains, it seems sort of in a sense almost boring, perhaps at the beginning of the 2000s, or even let's say 5 years ago, because we all thought we had global supply chains sorted out. But then along came the COVID pandemic, and we all suddenly realized what happens if supply chains, if there are shocks in the supply chain, which is what this game is about. And to me, so suddenly it really brought home lots of the learnings from the beer game. Suddenly became, we all experienced it ourselves when we went to the shop and couldn't buy loo paper and things like that. So I think the game in many ways is more current than ever. So I hope you will enjoy it. The game can be played alone in teams of 4 players or in large groups with several teams. Today, I think we'll have at least two teams playing the game. And now let me get into the details. What do we use it for? Perhaps what do we use at our company? So we use the game a lot to help our clients build a more data-driven analytical mindset. You see why in a minute, because it's all about data-driven decision making, learning about how to analyze data. Behind the game is in our case a simulation engine that we use to simulate the game setting, so that we can provide the game online, and we even have a version that uses machine learning to play the game. So we use it essentially as an introductory toolkit to data-driven analytical mindsets. So let me explain the setting again. So we have this supply chain. And the supply chain consists of 4 players: the brewery, the distributor, the wholesaler, and the retailer. And the consumer is outside of the supply chain, and the consumer, in a sense, is the driver for the whole game, because the consumer wants beer, and the objective of the supply chain, of the team playing together, is to provide the consumer with beer. And the supply chain, as I say, it's a team, so you're not playing against each other. So each team has to work together to supply the consumer with the beer he needs, and the only way you communicate is via the dashboard. So there's no verbal communication. So you play. The only way you communicate is via the dashboard, which I'll introduce to you in a second. And it's actually quite simple. All you really need to do every week is to order beer, and to order the right amount of beer to keep the supply chain stable, and also to provide the consumer with the beer he needs. So every week, it doesn't really matter which role you have. I've illustrated it using the wholesaler in this case. Every week you receive an order for an amount of beer, and then your job is to deliver that beer. In our case, the game actually, the system actually delivers the beer automatically. So the only thing you need to worry about is ordering. So you receive an order, and most of the time you will notice you don't have enough beer in stock. So you need to then make a decision of how much beer you want to order from your distributor, from the person, from your supplier. And then you make an order decision, make that order, and then you wait for the beer to arrive. Okay, so it's actually quite a simple setting, and the game mechanics are the same for every player in the supply chain. So it doesn't matter which role you have, all of you have to do the same thing. Okay, so the only decision you need to make is to make an ordering decision. How does that work? This is the dashboard. I'll explain it to you again in a second live using the website, but just to give us some time to get used to the dashboard. So every player sees the same dashboard. At the top, you can see which part of the supply chain you are. If you hover over the bubble in the website, you will actually get a display of the information. And the green, the one that is marked green, is always your role. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at the distributor's dashboard, but every dashboard essentially looks the same. So let's take some time to look at this. So what you see on the top left, you see the orders from your customers. So not the end consumer's orders, but the order from your customers. In this case, this will be the orders from the wholesaler. It actually says that down here as well. So you have a customer, and you have so whoever you are in the supply chain, you have a customer, and you also have a supplier. Because even for the brewery at the end, the brewery supplier is the actual brewery itself. So you're the manager of the brewery, and you have to order beer from your manufacturing site. So even you have a supplier, okay? And so you get orders from your customer, and you need to make a decision about how. Okay, so you need to satisfy that order. So let's see what else we have on the dashboard. The next important thing on the dashboard is the inventory. This shows you how much beer you have on stock. So in this case, we can see that the customer has ordered 595 units of beer, but you have 0 beer in your store. So obviously you need to make a decision and order something, okay? We can also see the back order. The back order is how much beer customers have already ordered, which you couldn't deliver. Okay, so the system remembers how much beer you owe your customers, and that's a really, really important number, because obviously your goal is to keep that back order down to 0, because you want to make sure that your customer always gets the beer he orders. Okay, so these two values here, the back order and the inventory, are really important to you because you want to make sure that the back order is close to 0 and the inventory doesn't get too large. Because if you have too much beer in your warehouse, then you need to rent extra space to store the beer, and that also costs money. Okay, so these two values are really, really important. Then we can see your running costs. So these are the costs you've had so far. So the whole objective of the game is, on the one hand, to make sure that the end consumer gets enough beer, but on the other hand, you want to keep the costs low, because obviously you want your business to be economically feasible. I get to the cost accounting in a second. And then we have two more values here: the incoming delivery and the outgoing delivery. They're not quite so important for your decision-making process. They just essentially show how much beer is coming in and how much beer is going out. So coming in from your supplier and how much beer is going out to your customers. Okay, so that's added information, which isn't really in a sense relevant to your decision-making process, but just to show you what's going on in the game. Okay, you can also see down here there's a button called Order History, which shows you how much beer, shows you what's been going on in the last week. So sometimes in the middle of the game, you'll find that you want to check what your decisions were in the weeks beforehand, and you can look at the order history. You can see down here there's a progress bar that's visible for people playing on screens that are large enough, i.e. on normal laptops. The progress bar looks slightly different on iPads, but it's still there nevertheless. The point here is that the game is played in 24 rounds, 24 weeks, but each round is one virtual week, and so it takes 24 rounds to actually finish the game. Okay, and so every week you have to make an order decision, and the objective is, by the end of the game, to keep the costs low, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, to satisfy your customers' demand for beer. Let me go on to the next page. So this shows you what the order history looks like. So in the order history, you can see, if you open that, you can see what happened in the weeks beforehand. This information may be useful to you when you make your decisions. You don't have to use it, but it's there if you want to. So what we can already see, this is a very data-driven game. You get lots of information about what's going on in the game, and that information is the basis you have to make your decision. There's a few things you need to sort of be aware of when you play the game. First of all, there's nothing in the game. There isn't anything. Perhaps it's really important for you to know. There's nothing freaky going on in the game. Okay, so the only people who can change what's going on in the game are the players, and so there are no random elements. Okay, so you don't need to worry about something going wrong or beer getting lost on the way or whatever. That doesn't happen. So this is a very straight game. The only agents making decisions in the game are the players and the consumer at the beginning, who may change his ordered behavior, and that's played by the machine. But we don't lose any beer. There are no freak accidents or anything like that, so you don't need to worry about that. The point is, though, because this is a supply chain, if you, let's say you're the retailer and you order beer today, then it doesn't necessarily mean, this is an Amazon, okay, that you get the beer the next day or the next week. So you make an order decision, and because the order decision is passed along the supply chain, in the worst case, it can take 5 or 6 weeks for the beer that you ordered to arrive, because it takes time for the order to wander up the supply chain, and then for the beer to be brewed and to come down the supply chain on the other side. Okay, so if you make an order, don't be surprised if it doesn't arrive the next week. Okay, that's really, really important for you to know. There are delays in the supply chain, and these delays aren't artificial, so there are no artificial delays. The delays simply come because you have to make sure that you order enough beer, and if there isn't any beer around, then the brewery has to be. If there isn't enough beer around, the brewery has to brew the beer, and so that takes some time. Okay, so you have to sometimes be a little patient once you've made an order for the beer to arrive. Okay. So this is like in real life, okay? If you go to the shop and the shop is out of stock, then it takes a while for your order to be fulfilled, okay? Okay, and there's another thing that you need to worry about, in the sense is that the objective of the game is to fulfill your customers' demand for beer, but also to keep the costs down. I come to the cost target in a second. And so there's two things you need to look at. One of the things is the back order. The back order essentially says how much beer do you owe your customer, and obviously it's a bad thing if you can't fulfill your customer's order. So you're penalized every time your back order is bigger than 0. You penalized money essentially. So your costs go up if your back order is bigger than 0. Okay, so your objective is to keep the back order, to get the back order to 0 as quickly as possible. That's one objective. On the other hand, so then it would be easy to say, let's order 1 million crates of beer, and then you will always be able to satisfy your customers' demand. Yes, that would be a strategy, but obviously in real life, if you had that much beer, you'd have to store it somewhere in your storage area, in your inventory, and therefore you also penalized, you have to pay rent essentially for your storage area. And so the bigger your inventory is, the higher your costs are. Okay, so the target of the game essentially is to keep the inventory below 400. So that's the magical number, because above that number, your costs start going up and up and up. Okay, so try and keep your inventory low, but on the other hand, also try to keep the back order to 0. And that's where the game becomes sort of slightly more complicated, because you're always in that dilemma of, on the one hand, wanting to order enough, but on the other hand, not to order too much, because if you order too much, you're also penalized. Okay, and that's what makes the game, in a sense, slightly more complicated. So that's something you need to be aware of. Okay, and then that leads to the question, how will you be evaluated at the end? And this is sort of, in a sense, where the fun comes in. So you play the game for the 24 rounds, for the 24 weeks. And at the end of the game, your performance is evaluated. So you get all the information about how much you ordered, how much your costs were, and so on. And in the end, the target is, and as I say, you're not playing against anyone. Your target is to make sure that your costs stay below 7,800 euros at the end of the game, and also that the total supply chain costs, i.e., all the costs of all the players added together, are below 29,300 euros. So the exact number doesn't matter. The point is you want to keep the costs down as far as possible, and you can only do that if you, in a sense, cooperate, which means that you have to make sort of wise ordering decisions and don't bring in too many shocks into the supply chain. Okay, and so at the end of the game, we will take a look at it together. Obviously, that's in a sense the interesting thing, to see how your team performed, how your team managed to play the game. And obviously, if we have more than one team, we can also compare the team's playing behavior amongst each other. But as I say, there's no individual there is no individual performance ranking, because the whole game is about cooperation. Okay. Good. That gives, I think, sort of concludes the overview. Why can't I? Yeah. So now we can get started, and I will briefly now switch to my browser and explain the game. Give you a brief overview of the game, what it looks like live, because obviously in the slides it's one thing. Then you will also have the opportunity to ask questions before we really get started. Okay, so we're not quite getting started, but you can all start getting warmed up by opening the game in your browser to make sure that you can connect. For those of you who want to play, who want to join the game. And I will now switch my, turn off my slides, and we'll turn on the browser and share my browser to show you what the game looks like in live. Okay, so just give me a second. So here's my browser, and here I've opened up the browser, and you should actually see this. For those of you who want to play, please now join the game. Once you've got to this screen, don't click on anything else yet before we get started, to make sure you don't get lost. What I'll do now is quickly give you an overview of the single player mode game, so that you can see what the dashboard looks like before we then start playing the game in the team. Okay, so so don't do anything yet, but just make sure that you can connect. And before we really get started, I'll also give you the opportunity to ask any questions if you have any. So I start playing the so-called single player game, which essentially means that it's still the entire supply chain, but you play the retailer, and the computer, the simulation, takes over the other roles. so that you can actually practice the game. So once we played the game today, if you're still interested in it, then you can practice the game on your own. But it's actually quite difficult to achieve all the game results. So here's the dashboard, what it looks like in real life. So pretty much like it looked like in the slides. Up here, you can see the supply chain. In this case, we can see the supply chain goes from the consumer via the retailer, wholesaler, distributor, and the brewery. And in this case, I'm playing the retailer. Okay, so this is why the retailer is green here, but all the dashboards look the same. And we can see we are at the beginning of week 1. So this is essentially the initial setting of the game. This is what happened last week, and now we're making the order decision for week 1. Okay, and the game starts in the steady state. So you can see the customer's orders 100. So you can imagine the customer has always been ordering 100 units of beer, and so every week we receive 100 units of beer. We deliver 100 units of beer, and our inventory stays stable. Okay, so that's the basic initial setting of the game. We start in a stable state. Okay, so because nothing is happening, the customer is ordering 100 units of beer. I may as well order 100 units of beer because it all looks very stable, and my inventory is at 400, which is perfect. So I order, and so down here I can change the amount of beer I want to order. But in this case, it makes sense to stay with the 100. So then I make that order, click the order button, and it takes a while. And you will see when you play in the team, you can see the other people. You have to wait for everyone to make the order. So some people want to spend more time thinking about their order, which is fine, because depending on your position in the supply chain, the order is going to look different. So you may have to sort of put more thought into it. So you will see a little clock down here showing you who's already ordered. And then you can, so you have to wait until it moves on into the next round. Okay, and then it moves into the next round. So in this case, now I'm in week 2. Again, nothing much has changed. Okay, so everything's looking very stable. So again, I can also order 100 units of beer. And then we go into round 3. And suddenly we see that there's a change in ordering behavior. The customer suddenly ordered 400 units of beer. Okay, my inventory's gone down to 100. 100 units of beer came in, 400 went out. So that's why I'm now at 100, because my entire inventory went to the customer, but then 100 units of beer came in. So that's why I now have 100 units of beer in stock. So now I need to make a decision. What do I do? Okay. I don't know exactly what the customer is going to do next week, but I can see my inventory is going to go has gone down. So I need to make a decision. Do I order 100 units again? Do I order the 400 units the customers ordered? Do I order more to replenish my inventory? That's the decision you have to make. Okay, and that's where the game starts getting more interesting. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the introduction. So we could start playing now. But let me give you the opportunity. Let's take a look at the board to see how many people want to play. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people wanting to play, which is perfect. So we could open the game with two tables, 2 supply chains, or 3. Someone else is joining up. Fantastic. So now we have exactly 2. So that's 8 people. So I would open the game for 8 people, but if someone else wants to join, please let me know now, because I always need groups of 4 people. So 8 people is great. More than the tables are filled up with artificial players. So
maybe a quick question.
Yeah, sure. Any questions?
Does it make sense to to stay without playing? So can you learn, and how would that work? Should then one person share the screen? Or I'm wondering if for the people that think like, maybe they don't want to be active, or they don't have they would like to maybe see how it goes, but not necessarily be active in the game. Does it make sense? Or
oh, definitely, it definitely makes sense for those of you who don't want to play for it. So the point is, it's in a sense completely anonymous. So only you know how you personally perform. So no names will be displayed, okay, at the end of the game. So there's no risk in playing the game. But if you don't want to play the game for whatever reason, then it's still worth staying on, because you can see the game results at the end, and that's the fun stuff when we start discussing what happened in the supply chain. How did the teams perform? Okay, so then if you don't want to play now, then while the game goes on, it's probably going to take about 10-15 minutes. Then you can go and get a coffee, but stay online. I won't be sharing the screen because obviously we don't want to, in a sense, I mean, I can see the game performance as the facilitator, but I don't want to share that because obviously that would destroy the game for the other players. Yeah. So if you don't want to play yourself, then just be patient for 50 minutes and then we'll look at the game results, and that's always fun for everyone, I think. So it's definitely worth staying on if you want to. Okay.
Okay.
So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Okay. Anyone else wanting to join? Because if I only open it up for 8 people, then no one else can join. So if we have one other person, then I can open up 3 tables, and that will give you more opportunity. So I wait 1 more second to see if anyone else joins. Otherwise, I'll open for 8 people.
And it will take like 15 minutes, you said? About
50, around about 15 minutes. It depends a little bit on how quickly you make your ordering decisions. So it's plenty of time to grab a coffee and then come back.
Okay. And you said it's not good, like we don't want to have anyone sharing the screen because that would...
The problem, as one person could share the screen if they want to, but the point I think is that I don't want to share the overall dashboard. That would destroy the game for the other players.
Right.
So I think it's best just to be patient for 10 minutes. Okay. Before we get started, just one more thing. So I'll quickly show you where you need to go now. So now, assuming all of you at this screen, so make sure you're at this screen at the top level. And I'll just guide you to make sure that you will find the playing area. We're going to start playing. And what we're going to do now, we're going to play the so-called multi-game because we're playing multiple games in parallel. So please click on the multi-game. And now you need to join an existing multi-game. So click on the left-hand screen, join an existing multi-game. And this is where you need to input a code, which I'll give to you in a second. Okay, so I'll quickly set up the game. And then, so from now on, don't follow me. You stay on this screen. And what I will do now, I will set up the game to give you the lobby code. And by the way, anyone, you can play this game at your company. So once you've seen how to play the game today, you can facilitate the game yourself. So everything you learn now, you can apply for yourself. So you stay here, but I will now jump out again, and I will now set up the game for the multi-game. Okay. So I go in here, but you don't follow me now, please. So I set up the game for the multi-game, but you can watch if you want to, so that you can see what I do. It's very simple. In this case, I want to play the multiplayer game. So I'll just make sure to see. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 people. That's fantastic. So I can do 2 tables. So multiplayer, continue. I want to play the easy level. Continue. I don't need a name for the lobby. So now I want 2 games, 2 parallel games. So I can set it to 2 here, and I can go click on finish. And it says, are you happy with this? Do you want to create 2 games? Yes, I do. So now I create those 2 games. Now the games are being started in the background. So just hang on a second. So this is the lobby code you need to enter. So please enter this code 4651514 into your browser, and then you will see the tables, and you can join one of the tables. It doesn't matter which one. The key point here is that please remember which table you joined. Okay, and later on, remember also which role you had in the supply chain. So I can see here already, I have 4 players have joined already in the game 1, but 0 players have joined in game 2. So I need a few more players. Number 1's joined, fantastic. So again, we should see 8 people joining here. And if I wanted to, I could fill the empty spots with so-called AI players, which is essentially artificial computer players. So if you want to play the game in your company and you don't have exactly 4 people, that's no problem. You can play with artificial players to fill up the supply chain. But today we don't need that. And this screen shows me the progress of what's going on, so I can facilitate the game. And I would be, shortly, I will disable this screen so that you can't all follow what's going on, because that's obviously, in a sense, part of the fun, not to know how the supply chain is doing. One player is still missing.
Oliver,
yeah?
How can I see which role I have? Is it where the still star is?
Yes, you're the one with the stars.
Okay,
You're the
good.
one with the star. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
And you'll also see when the game starts. The main point is remember the number, which table you're playing, because later on for the performance appraisal that's relevant. So we're still missing one player in team 2.
Antje is saying that she cannot join. Why is that, Antje?
Maybe
unmute yourself.
Maybe a technical issue. In which case, I fill the role with an AI player. But it would be a shame if Antje can't join. Antje's joining. I don't know where to click. Have you managed to? So I'll just quickly add that again. Hang on a second. Beer game.
So yeah, beergametranscendus.com, and then you type in the code 46514.
Yeah. I'll just add the instructions again to the chat. Then start game. Then multiplayer.
Maybe
I'll show it again in a second. I'll just type it into the chat box. Join existing game.
Antje, if you can unmute yourself, then you can also let us know where you are hanging in the process.
So I quickly show this on another screen. Just close the chat box. So for Antje, I'll just go into the. I'll start the game again to make sure that you find the right session. So if you go into, I've got it in German. I'll change it to English. Start playing. Multi-game, and then join an existing game. Okay. And then you should be able to join.
Does it work?
And then you can add this code here. Oh, yeah, I've got 4 players in there now. Fantastic. So obviously it has worked. Great. Good. Just make sure that I just check the chat to see. I missed the link, but you seem to be there now, Antje, right? Okay, I think Antje must be here now because I have 4 players in the game. Okay, so what I will do now.
We don't need breakout rooms or something, right, Oliver? Like we're not talking with each other during the game.
No, you didn't know. The whole point is not to chat. So the only way you communicate within the supply chain is via your dashboard. Okay, so we're ready now. So I will start the games, and then
I don't know if Maru had a question. He raised his hand.
Okay.
No, it's solved now. I wanted to help with Antje's situation.
Okay, fantastic. So any more questions before we get started? I think the best thing is to experience the game and to see how it works out. And if you have any questions during the game, and I'm obviously going to be here, I'm just going to turn off my screen in a second, but I start the games now, and then be patient, but your screen will change and we will see the dashboard I showed you previously. Okay, and then you can start playing. So I'll start the games. Okay, so it'll take a second for it to switch on your screen, and everything should start going. And I stop sharing my screen now, but I'm still here, obviously. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
And then I will stop recording, right, Oliver? I think that we don't need.
Okay, fine.
Should we? Yeah. Okay.
Well, we can start recording again when we do the performance appraisal, perhaps, because that's interesting for the participants.
Yeah,
okay.
Let's do that.
Okay. Fantastic. I know this is always in a sense also a little bit stressful. So anyway, how did you feel? We heard that it was nice to get the live commentary. So thank you for keeping your microphones open. That was fun. So here's the overview of the 2 supply chains. So here we have, so game 1, in a sense, managed to keep the costs much lower. So game 1's costs were 250,000. Game 2 was over 1 million, I think, on costs. So game 2 definitely, and as I said, the target was at 300,000. So somewhere the target will be down here. Okay, so let's see what happened. Let's take a look at what the supply chains look like. So here we have the let's take a look at the ordering behavior. And this is something that we typically see in whenever you play the beer game. This is what happens. You see this what's known as, and this is a very famous effect known as the bullwhip effect or whiplash effect, which is what always happens in supply chains, is that the first person, in this case the retailer, makes an order, then the next person along the supply chain has to make an order that is slightly bigger to fulfill the retailer. Then the next person up the supply chain, the distributor, makes an ordering decision which is even bigger, and then the brewery does the same. The reason being that you're always running along to catch up along the supply chain, so the orders tend to get bigger and bigger up the supply chain. It's known as the bullwhip effect, and you can look it up on Wikipedia. If you look up the beer game on Wikipedia or the bullwhip effect, you will see that, and we can see that illustrated really nicely here. In how the orders build up. The really interesting thing though is that the end consumer, and that's in a sense the whole what makes the beer game so interesting, that the end consumer actually only changes his ordering behavior once. In week 2, at the beginning of week 3, it goes up to 400 units, and then it stays stable at 400 units of beer per week. So the consumer actually doesn't change his behavior at all. It changes it once. So there's one shock in the supply chain, and then for everyone else, so the only person who, in a sense, realizes this is the retailer, because the retailer is obviously the next person speaking to the consumer. But for everyone else behind, it looks like there's a massive amount of ordering going on, but actually it's, in a sense, this is all due to the bullwhip effect, and there is a way of keeping that down. You can't ever get rid of it completely, but this is sort of the fascinating thing about the big game, and we always see this behavior. And obviously, you can train, you can learn how to play the game properly. We could, you can read about it actually on our website or in the game, and you can play the game yourself in a small team of 4 people or on your own to practice this. It's in a sense not difficult, but the interesting thing is that the same thing always happens. And if we look at the same graph for game 2, then we probably see that it sort of, in a sense, looks similar. In this case, we can see that the ordering, initially there wasn't enough ordering, and then there were 2 peaks. And I think a couple of times the brewery didn't order enough, and then suddenly the brewery ordered enough, and then the big peak came along. Yeah. But again, it's a sort of, in a sense, a similar behavior. You can see how slowly it builds up. In this case, there were, I think, due to misordering, it came fairly late. So we can see the more typical behavior in game 1. And you can take time to check through your numbers. You can actually access the game. Well, you can actually download the data if you want to, or take screenshots of the gaming behavior. Okay, so this is in a sense typical, and I played the big game last week in a live session, and we saw exactly the same behavior. So sometimes it's a bit higher or a bit lower, but it's pretty much always the same story. And obviously you've played the game now for the first time, yeah, and we see people playing it online who practice this again and again to keep their ordering behavior low. And what I can quickly do. So any questions so far because I can show you in a sense the optimal ordering behavior so that you can see so you can see what that looks like, because it is actually possible to keep to achieve the game objectives. Yeah. Okay, any questions?
How does the consumer behave? Is that randomized? So will
no, the consumer. So if you play the easy setting, then the consumer always plays the same. Yeah, because the point is. You want to, in a sense, firstly, we want to illustrate the whiplash effect, and obviously, if you have completely random customer behavior, it gets much more difficult to play the game correctly. So typically, people play the game with the basic setting. For more advanced groups, so this game is often used in supply chain courses at university. So a number of universities use this game, and so we also provide more advanced settings for those who want to practice the game. Who want to, in a sense, optimize their playing behavior. because it's actually quite a realistic simulation of supply chains. So a lot of also large logistic companies also play the game, so they can teach their people about the whiplash effect. So we do have more advanced settings, but if you play the game, the single player game, it's always going to be the same behavior, so that you can practice these things. Good. Let me just quickly, perhaps, I'll jump out of here. So as I say, if you all have your own performance appraisal, I can access the data also later on. So if you want to have a summary of the data, just let me know. But what I'll do now, I quickly show you my here. If you sign up for the game, then you can you can facilitate. So if you want to facilitate the game in your company, you can sign up. It doesn't cost you any money, and then you can also access sort of old games. You have a game history, so you can look at old games you played with different data. And here I have an example of, in the single player game, what it looks like, what the optimal order behavior would be. Okay, so in this case, really the retailer only needs to make one ordering decision, and then he can almost stay the same, and then add a little bit of extra orders at the end. The interesting thing is, though, that if we do look at the whiplash effect, that you still see the same effect. So even if the game is played in a sense in an optimal way, to ensure that you actually achieve all game objectives. So if I go back here, we can see down here in the costs that we managed to achieve in this variant, we managed to achieve all game objectives, so the costs are actually satisfied. We still see this bullwhip effect. Okay, so we still see that first of all, the retailer, the consumer goes up, then the retailer's graph goes up, then the wholesaler, then the distributor, and then the brewery. But obviously, compared to your variant of the game, the peaks are much smaller, but we still see the peaks. Okay, that's the so-called bullwhip effect, which you can't really escape. So it's actually quite interesting.
Now, optimal strategy. What was the strategy the player followed here?
Well, in a sense, the right strategy is always to keep your I'll show you the order history. So you also have this view in your game, but obviously, it's clear initially you have data overload. Yeah, so no one manages to play the game in a sense correctly straight away. But if you look here, then you'll see that the sum of the open orders and the back orders. Sorry, if you subtract the back orders from the open order, you always end up with the number 400. So the point is, you need to balance your back orders, how much you owe your customers, and the open orders is how much you are owed by your supplier.
Okay,
and in the end, that has to be in balance.
This is now if I'm able to predict what's the next order coming, right?
No, well, yeah. So the assumption always is. So the assumption you always have to make is that the next week customer's order is roughly going to be the same. If the customer's order suddenly goes up, you're always going to be lagging slightly behind. But even then, you can try and close the gap, and you're not allowed to close the gap too quickly, because if you suddenly make a massive order, then you bring another shock into the supply chain further down. So you have to close the gap fairly slowly. But yes, you do have to make a prediction, but you don't have to make a long-term prediction. You just have to make a prediction about what you think is going to happen the next time round after the customer's already made an order. So essentially, you predict that the customer is going to behave the same the next week as they did this week, essentially. Good, and I mean, you can read all these things, by the way, on the Beer Game website. We have some guides which firstly take you a step-by-step walk through the game, and also give you more insight on understanding what's going on in the background. But it's actually, it's actually quite a complex topic. Good. Anyway, so thank you very much for taking part. I'll stop sharing now, and then we can, yeah, I'll pass back to you, Robert.
Cool. Thanks a lot. So. Yeah, I think that was really interesting, and especially to see this effect based on how small decisions and basically local optimization decisions are made that have a huge impact on the whole system, on the global optimization system.
Yes, and also, but perhaps one thing we can add there, if you sort of translate it to other, in a sense, corporate settings, the point here is you have a process, the supply chain, where you, as one of the parts of the supply chain, don't have total control of what's going on in the supply chain. So you don't have any overview. You're just part of, you make local decisions, and you don't have a way of optimizing globally, and you also don't have a way of communicating. So obviously the next thing, and that's something that obviously in real supply chains was learned already in the 70s when supply chain integration happened, and you try to integrate information along global supply chains. So you can see already what it means if you have an information deficit and if you don't see the big picture, which is where sort of systems thinking comes in. Okay, so there's lots of lessons you can learn from this, but the point also is that often you don't have the chance, you don't have the chance to communicate globally, and this shows what happens if what can go wrong if that happens. So it's I think it's a very also is interesting from the supply chain perspective, but it's also an interesting metaphor for how processes work in companies. And also it shows what happens if you have information, in a sense, overload, because you have so much information initially that you can quickly become overloaded. But on the other hand, if you take your time to analyze the information, which you don't have during the game setting because you're under pressure, people are waiting, get on, make an order, so there's pressure. You also notice when you're playing the game, people will be becoming impatient, but someone hadn't clicked the button yet. And the point is that also happens in real life. So even if you have the information, you often don't have to take the time to analyze the data you do have. And if you did that, then you can quickly, and if you play the game, more than once, you can quickly learn how to play the game properly. But it also shows that in real life, you're often under pressure, and it's exactly the same in this game. So, and you could also see, people made typo mistakes. So I think Mara was the name, made a typo mistake, and that's a real hassle. And you want to click the undo button, and there isn't one. But the point is that also happens in real life, right? People make mistakes, and it shows why, in a sense, even in a sense, simple processes are error prone if people are involved. So it's I think it's very fascinating in many ways, this game.
Yeah, but I think, from what I see, definitely you can see that when you do it without talking, and then maybe do another round with talking and speaking about what is the current situation, how people what is the actual customer order, what people have in their inventory, and see the back order, then you can make better decision, right?
Definitely. So if everyone, so that's what we typically do. You can play another round with communication, then you can start optimizing. You can play the game a number of times on your own and to try and optimize your behavior, because you quickly learn what the right playing strategy is. So there's lots of ways of taking this further. So you can spend a whole day on a beer game workshop if you wanted, learning about, in a sense, complex systems.
Cool. Yeah. Any more?
If it's the second time with the same group, do you change the settings because the group already knows what orders are coming, right?
Yes, but I think it's still interesting, because I think it's only for the retailer that, in a sense, it's very stable, because even if you play the game with the really stable settings, for everyone else in the supply chain, it's not completely stable. We could see in the graph, it slowly moves up and down. So it's not quite so simple. It gets more complex the further up the supply chain you are. So yes, we play the game again with the same settings, but as I say, you can also then, once the group is confident, says, I think we know how to do it now, then you can try it with more complex settings there too. And you can also change the delays between the players there. So there's lots of variants you can play to make it more complex. But I think, it depends a little bit on what you want to teach, in a sense, the audience. We find even the simple version is enough to bring a few important points home, which is how to deal with data, how to communicate better, how to be patient and take your time to make decisions, and so on.
Cool.
I played the brewery in game one, and if I had to guess what the customers' orders were throughout the cycle, then
it's quite difficult.
Entirely different from from the results, right? But now
yes.
when I then finally saw the results, Now, if I play another time, I would completely ignore what orders are coming and just order like, I know you only need 400, so I might
you could do that, but you're not allowed to forget that in the end your costs are determined by how much you owe your customer. So even if you know that the end customer,
right.
the back order makes a difference to the costs. Yeah. So yes, it's true that in reality you know what the end consumer is doing, but nevertheless you're forced to make your customer happy. Yeah, and that's sometimes true in real life also. Yeah, that you know that in the end this cannot be true, but your customer wants to have this from you, and you have to make the customer happy. Yeah, so it's not so easy, and it's the same for the game. Yeah, you penalized even if you know that actually your customer is making the wrong decision. You're still penalized if you don't satisfy his order, right? So it's actually quite a even though it's actually a simple in a sense, it's conceptually a simple game. It's actually a complex setting. Yeah, there's lots of things going on. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I did the same. I had also, I think I previously tried out with and I knew about this 400. So I used the same, but I still saw that the customer, like the back orders are bigger than I was expecting. And I was a bit confused because I was thinking that they're not, the actual customer is not ordering that much, and I still had so much back orders, and it was hard to still keep low and keep my ordering number pretty low, and but you still see that the dynamics that you described. So that was
and especially if you now imagine you're in a setting where it's not stable, where someone has changed the settings to more, you don't know which setting you're in, right? When you're playing the game, you don't know. You can only predict what's going on by looking at your consumer. So it's as I say, I mean, I've been playing this for many years, and I still find it sometimes very complex to understand what is going on, because it's a dynamic system and they behave in very complex ways. Yeah, even if it's conceptually simple. Yeah.
Cool. Maru?
I think we have a question from Maru. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. The first one is, you said that the behavior of the client, I don't know, it was last mile maybe, I don't know. Client order disruption was the same, always at the same time point, same disruption. So I have two questions related to this. Are there sets of simulations that show you the standard, I don't know, X cases that are going to happen, or X patterns of cases that are going to happen, and show you then, okay, these are the optimal action to take at these 3 or 4 or 5 time points, etc., in this range? And the second question is related. That's why I'm going to do the root thing and ask two questions at the same time, but it's related. This one is not about the simulations, if they exist, because you said it's the same disruption, but this is about if there were time series predictions, for example, run on the logs of these orders that you can get from the client at the last mile. So this is a double-edged sword question, but I hope it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, let me quickly, very briefly, perhaps. Well, first of all, in a basic setting, it's always the end consumer always behaves in the same way, simply to give players a stable setting in which to work with. Because otherwise, if there were too much randomness or change in that, it would be even more complex to understand what is going on. Okay, so in the basic setting, it's always the same. But as I say, we have an advanced version, so you can play the advanced version and you can change the settings. But just to give you an overview, because you're going into the details. First of all, here we have a little blog post on using time. In this case, it is time series analysis. So actually, it's reinforcement learning, training AI to play the game. Yeah, so how could you use the predictive algorithm to play the game better? So, we use it as a showcase to illustrate some AI principles. So that if you're interested in more analytical stuff, then please take a look at this. And then also really important, I'm showing you this on the website, but the links are here, so you can access everything. We have a GitHub repository, which I quickly open, which is called Beer Games, so nothing unusual there. And it contains a number of Jupyter notebooks and simulations that you can use to experiment with the games. Everything here is open source. You can download everything and start playing with it. If you have an analytical background, you need to know how to deal with a little bit of analytics in Python. But it contains the AI version, it contains a normal version. You can simulate different scenarios. So if you want to do that, we have all the information there for you on our GitHub repo. Okay, so you can really experiment. And as I say, in the end, there is a simulation engine in the back of the game that manages the game mechanics, and that simulation is provided in that repository, and you can play with it and test different scenarios. And as I say, supply chain or dynamic supply chains or any kind of dynamic systems, they're very complex to understand, and that's why you need simulations to test different scenarios, essentially. Okay, but if you're interested in that, then there's plenty of information on our website for you to check out.
Yeah, thank you for that. I knew that from attending some of your meetups from 2020.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I didn't know that. Okay, well, that's good to see you again. So now you've played the game live. I think in the other meetups I've mentioned the game, but we never played it. Yeah.
Never played it, and I've never opened any of the notebooks. I am indeed a data scientist and an agilist, so one of those weirdos. But my interest is in I'm going to check the GitHub repo, and I'm really curious if there are other types of games or systems that you simulate, or you could think about simulating using the same approach with time series.
Sure. There's lots of things. Well, check out our repo, but on the web in general, you find lots of information outlined. I mean, it's a very rich topic. Yeah.
I'll just write you on LinkedIn because I would be super curious, because I want to do a project on this. I actually have to submit it in 4 weeks, so that could be a nice thing to work on.
Well, happy to chat in detail at any time.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Any more feedback or comments or questions? No, otherwise I would stop the recording, or do you want to say something before I stop?
I just wanted to say, we're always trying to improve the game, and if anyone wants to play it in their company and needs input, just let me know. Pretty much everything you need is available, I think, online to play the game. But if you have any questions, then just let me know. And as I say, it's played thousands of times all over the world. So for us, it's interesting to see, and we're always happy to get feedback to improve the game. So let me know if you have any ideas. Thank you.
Super, great stuff. Thanks, Oliver. It was very nice to try it in the round, and I'm happy that a few people came here and tried it out and had fun. Hopefully, you can try it with your teams. I will stop recording. Thanks again for being here, Oliver.